throughout my whole entire night and morning, it was a physical battle. For the majority of the night, fighting through sickness, but fighting all the same. As I was walking through my kitchen about 2 or 3 o'clock this morning, bent over, was struggling hard, and I was shuffling through the kitchen, holding on to the countertops, and then it hit me. Stand up, boy.
It is 2 in the morning, and one of gospel music's most celebrated voices is bent over a kitchen counter, shuffling across the floor, holding on just to stay upright. No stage, no spotlight, no applause. Just a man alone in the dark, his body failing him, asking God a question that gets no immediate answer. And yet, by morning, he is standing in front of thousands, back straight, shoulders squared, preaching like the night never happened. Most people in that congregation see a miracle. What they don't fully see is the war it took to get him to that pulpit. That is the story Donnie McClurkin told them himself, and it is one of the most quietly devastating things a public figure has said from a stage in recent memory, not because it is tragic, but because of what he chose to do with it. Stop here for a moment, because this is not a story about collapse. This is a story about what a man does when everything in his body says stop and everything in his faith says stand. And those two things, in the early hours of that morning, were at war with each other in a very real, very physical way. Donnie McClurkin did not walk into that church healthy. He walked in having spent the majority of the previous night fighting through what he described as a physical battle, a level of sickness severe enough that by his own account, he was bent nearly double in his kitchen, gripping the countertops, shuffling from room to room in the dark. He was not speaking in metaphor. He was not reaching for a sermon illustration. He was describing exactly what his body was doing to him at 2 or 3 in the morning, hours before he was expected to lead a congregation in worship. And if you understand anything about Donnie McClurkin, his history, his theology, his particular and hard-won understanding of suffering, then you understand why he was still going to show up regardless. Here is what almost everyone who knows his music knows. Donnie McClurkin does not quit. He has never quit. That is not a casual observation about his work ethic. It is the central fact of his life, a principle carved into him by a childhood that most people could not survive intact. Born in Amityville, New York in 1959, McClurkin grew up in a household shaped by devastation. His brother was killed in a traffic accident when Donnie was a child, an accident that Donnie himself survived. His father was largely absent. The early years were marked by the kind of grief and instability that either breaks a person completely or forges in them something nearly unbreakable. In McClurkin's case, it did the latter, but not without cost. What he found in the church, and specifically in gospel music, was not an escape from suffering. It was a language for it. He found a way to transform pain into something that other people could hear and feel understood by. That is a rare gift, and it is also a heavy one, because it means you are never allowed to put the pain down. You are always being asked to hold it up, shape it, offer it. And when your own pain is too fresh or too current, the weight of that calling becomes almost impossible. But this is where the story turns, because what happened in that kitchen in the early hours of that morning was not a breaking point, it was a decision point. By Donnie McClurkin's own account, he was not just fighting sickness, he was fighting the temptation that sickness brings, the temptation to interpret physical suffering as spiritual abandonment. He asked God directly, with the kind of raw honesty that most people reserve for private prayer and almost nobody says from a pulpit. What are you doing? Not as a theological question, as a desperate one. As a man bent over a counter at 3 in the morning who genuinely needs an answer and is not getting one. And the silence that followed was not the silence of absence. That is the part that McClurkin returned to again and again in his message. God did not answer him, not with new information, not with fresh revelation, not with the kind of dramatic encounter that makes for a clean testimony. The answer he received was a redirection back to what he already knew. I already gave you my word. You read what I'm doing. You rehearsed what I'm doing. Now you have to stand on what I'm doing. That is not a comfortable theology. That is a demanding one. And the demand it placed on Donnie McClurkin in that kitchen, in the dark, alone, was to get up anyway. Consider what it means for a man of his specific history to stand up in that moment. McClurkin has spoken publicly over the years about the accumulation of loss and struggle that have defined large portions of his life. He is someone who understands, on a level that is not theoretical, that faith is not a shield against suffering. It is something you carry through it. He has spoken about personal battles that went well beyond the physical, battles with identity, with grief, with the weight of public ministry, and the very private cost of living under it. He has been both celebrated and scrutinized, praised and criticized, often for the same qualities at the same time. His willingness to speak candidly from the pulpit about his own weakness is, paradoxically, one of the things that has made him one of the most trusted voices in gospel music for more than 40 decades. So when he stands before a congregation and says, "I stayed up for the majority of the night fighting through sickness, but fighting all the same," the word "all the same" carries everything. It carries every night he did not quit, every time the easier choice was to stay down and he chose not to. Every version of that kitchen he has stood in before, holding on to whatever was nearest, deciding once again to stand up. Here is the detail almost everyone misses when they hear a testimony like this. The audience receives the victory, but they rarely reckon with the night. There were thousands of people in that congregation who saw Donnie McClurkin walk onto that stage, back straight, voice strong, ready to preach with the kind of authority that draws applause before a word is spoken. They received the finished version. They did not see the shuffling. They did not see the counter he held on to. They did not hear the unanswered question. They received the testimony, but the war that produced it was fought in private, in the dark, in a kitchen by one man and whatever he had left. That gap between the private war and the public strength is one of the most significant and least discussed costs of spiritual leadership at the level McClurkin operates. The expectation is constant. The crowd does not take a night off because you're sick. The calling does not pause because your body is failing. And for someone whose entire life has been oriented around the principle that you show up, that you do not let your circumstances determine your obedience, the pressure that creates is enormous. It is also, by his own framework, the exact pressure that produces the thing he is trying to demonstrate. What he preached that morning was not a message of healing in the way that word is sometimes misused, as a promise that sickness will be removed, that faith guarantees physical restoration, that the right prayer produces the right outcome. What he preached was harder, and in some ways more honest than that. He preached about what faith demands, not what it promises in the short term, but what it requires in the dark. He said it demands that your faith not fail. It demands that you hold on tightly to what God has said. It demands that you do not buckle or cower in the face of what you are dealing with. And then he gave them the image, the soldier, the warrior, standing in front of every mountain and commanding it to move. Not asking, not hoping, commanding in the name of Jesus, because the word says that is what faith looks like in action. That is a message that could only be preached convincingly by someone who had just lived it, and the congregation knew it. The applause that followed was not the polite applause of an audience appreciating a performance. It was the recognition of people watching someone do in real time exactly what they were being asked to do. But here is the question underneath all of it, and it is one worth sitting with. What does it cost a man, physically, spiritually, personally, to live that way without stopping? To make the standing up the non-negotiable year after year, decade after decade, regardless of what the night held? McClurkin is not a young man.
He has been in ministry, in the public eye, carrying the weight of other people's need and his own faith and his own history for most of his life. And the image of him alone in a kitchen at 3 in the morning, bent over, asking God a question and receiving not comfort, but a command, "Stand up, boy, straighten up your back, square your shoulders," is not just inspiring, it is also a window into something that deserves more than a standing ovation. It deserves the recognition that this level of endurance is not costless, it is not easy, and the fact that he stands up does not mean the night was not real. The night was very real, the counter was real, the shuffling was real, the unanswered question was real, and he walked into that pulpit carrying all of it. What his congregation received that morning was something rarer than a polished sermon. They received a man in the middle of his own battle, choosing that battle as the text. He did not arrive having resolved the crisis. He arrived while still inside it, and he preached from inside it. And what came out was the kind of authority that cannot be manufactured and cannot be performed. You cannot fake 3 in the morning on a kitchen floor. You cannot stage that kind of honesty. It either happened or it didn't. And when it did, and the person still shows up, that is the testimony. The enemy's greatest attempt, he told them, is to get you to let go of the word, to make you waver, to see doubt in the space between what you believe and what you are currently experiencing. And in that kitchen, in the dark, the gap between what Donnie McClurkin believed and what his body was telling him was as wide as it has perhaps ever been. He did not pretend the gap wasn't there. He walked across it anyway. And then he stood at a pulpit and invited thousands of people to understand that they could do the same thing with whatever their version of that kitchen looks like. That is the sermon, but here is what the sermon points to. Every one of us, he said, has a different lot. Every one of us has a different battle. Not every battle is a kitchen counter at 3 in the morning. Not every battle is physical sickness, but the architecture of the struggle is the same. The pressure to doubt, the silence that feels like abandonment, the body or the circumstance or the situation telling you to stay down, and the harder, quieter, more costly choice to stand up anyway. He was not preaching only about his night. He was preaching about every night any person in that room had ever spent holding on to something just to stay upright. And the fact that he was still in the middle of his when he preached it, that he had not yet come through to the other side, that the sickness was not resolved, that the battle was still ongoing, made it not weaker but stronger. He was not giving them a finished story. He was giving them a live one. Think about who Donnie McClurkin has been across 40-plus years of gospel music, the albums that defined a generation of worship. We Fall Down, Stand. The very titles of his most celebrated songs are the vocabulary of endurance, of rising from something, of refusing to stay on the ground. It would be easy, perhaps too easy, to dismiss those songs as comfortable inspirational music, the kind of thing that sounds good in church and has no cost attached to it. But the man who wrote them and sings them has spent a lifetime earning the right to mean them. The biography underneath the music is not soft, it is not charmed, it is built on loss and survival, and the kind of faith that is tested regularly and seriously and has not collapsed. And so, when he stands in that kitchen at 3 in the morning, bent over, asking God what he is doing, and receiving no new answer, only a reminder of the word already given, the command already spoken, the promise already made, stand up, straighten your back, square your shoulders. He could have stayed home. By any reasonable human standard, he had a valid reason to. His body was giving him every signal that the right choice was rest, not the pulpit. But the framework he has built his entire life around, the framework forged by grief and survival and 40 decades of ministry, does not recognize that calculation. It recognizes only what has God said and are you standing on it. And so he stood, and he walked to the pulpit, and he told them everything, the shuffling, the counter, the unanswered question, the command that came back instead. And in doing so, he gave them something more valuable than a polished message delivered by a healthy man who had never fought through a hard night. He gave them proof, real, recent, personal proof that the thing he has been singing about his entire life is not a concept, it is a practice. And the practice is available in kitchens at 3 in the morning when nobody is watching and nothing is resolved. And the only thing standing between you and staying down is what you decide to believe about the word that was already given. That word, he says, is enough, not because it removes the battle, but because it tells you what to do inside it. And Donnie McClurkin, whatever the cost, is still doing it. There are other stories in gospel music, other voices, other battles, other testimonies forged in the kind of darkness most stages never reveal. Some of them end in standing ovations, some of them end in silence, and some of them, the most important ones, end not with a resolution, but with a man still in the middle, still holding on, still choosing to stand.